Welcome to the future.
My name is Sauliha Alli. I'm here to break down barriers.
What? See, nobody likes a narcissist. But once in a while, being able to look at ourselves from the outsider's eye can be incredibly powerful. In fact, one of the first stories ever told was the Greek myth of Narcissus. Legend has it that Narcissus was the most beautiful hunter that ever lived. So beautiful was he that anyone who saw him immediately fell in love with him. This was the case for the nymph Echo. But when Echo finally confessed her love for Narcissus, he responded with disdain and contempt, shunning her until she faded away. As punishment for this, the gods led Narcissus to a pool. As he leaned over the water, gazing for the very first time at what he didn't realize was his reflection, Narcissus fell in love. But when he finally realized that the object of his love was merely an image that would not materialize, he wasted away. And in his place, a flower, which we know today as the Narcissus flower, blossomed. As children, we learn that the story of Narcissus is a warning against narcissism. We learn that Narcissus' self-destruction stems from his self-obsession. But what many don't realize is that this is a story of transformation. Because ultimately, Narcissus is not totally destroyed. He is transformed into a flower. And the source of that transformation is self-reflection. So I want to take you back 4 years, back to the beginning of my undergrad. And I'll admit it, I was kind of the classic example of a pre-med student. I studied life sciences. I participated in healthcare clubs. Shout out to HOSA. I conducted medical research at the Center for Addiction and Mental Health. And every week, I would put on my scrubs and I would drive to Centenary Hospital, just up the road, where I would spend hours shadowing physicians and supporting patients. Oh, and I kind of may have dressed up as a doctor for Halloween once. Okay, twice. But medicine, as I saw it, was an avenue to save and meaningfully improve lives. And the goodness of that endeavor was really what drew me in. Yet, in my fourth year of study, that same desire to save and to meaningfully improve lives led me down another path, the path of international development. Wait, did she say international development? Yes, international development, the study of global issues of poverty, social inequality, and oppression. Under a Queen Elizabeth scholarship, I was selected to spend the summer in Ghana, where I would work with an international NGO to economically empower women and youth. I embarked on that journey with shining optimism. I was so excited to be part of an initiative that was giving back to less privileged communities. But as I attended training after training, class after class, I was astounded by the criticisms I encountered. International development profits from poverty, they said. International development reproduces colonialism, they said. International development promotes dependency, they said. International development should be stopped altogether. it was difficult to accept these criticisms. See, I was raised by a father who worked in development. And yes, he's right here in the audience. He's the guy who's smiling a little too widely because he didn't know I was going to talk about him. I was raised in a home where I was taught to always remember the less fortunate, to never waste the dinner that my parents provided. I was raised practicing a religion that preached charity and giving. I had never fathomed the idea that my innocent, almost altruistic actions could be so controversial. But as I completed more and more coursework in the field, the grounding for these criticisms became clearer. See, international development, which was focused primarily on improving the quality of life for those in developing countries, was born out of a colonialist ideal: to civilize the backward peoples of the non-white world. Foreign aid was often used by governments as a way to negotiate unfair trade agreements, turning development into a way of profiting from poverty. And finally, the focus of too many projects on doing for rather than with had led developing countries to become dependent on their benefactors in the long run. So I began to understand the controversy around development. But I started to wonder, was this field just problematic? Should I just go back to medicine as I had started? Or did medicine, this field I had only ever revered, also have the same challenges? Was medicine a modern colonial force? Did doctors profit from vulnerability? And could medical practice promote dependency? I had never encountered this sort of criticism about this field. So I went down the rabbit hole, researching this further, and I really had to go down the rabbit hole because there wasn't a whole lot. See, during colonialism, Western medicine was imposed on the colonies as superior to traditional healing practices. And sadly, this imposition continues today, even within national borders, with indigenous healing often quickly dismissed as inferior to evidence-based intervention. The capitalistic system in which medicine operates, where patients pay for treatment and sometimes consultation, allowed doctors to profit from vulnerability and illness. And finally, our over-reliance on medical advice and treatment, even in areas where we can care for ourselves, has raised questions about medicine promoting doctor dependency. So as I began to understand it, medicine and international development were really fraught with the same challenges. But there was one question that lingered. Why had these difficulties led development practitioners to consider totally denouncing their field, but had not led doctors to say, oh, let's stop practicing? What were the key differences between these disciplines that led one to be far more criticized than the other? And was there perhaps a way to use these differences to ultimately improve both fields? So I sat down and I got to work. After months of research, consultation, and reflecting on my personal experiences, I arrived at some answers. But today, I want to share 3 differences between medicine and international development that explained this disproportionate level of criticism. The first, their approach to intervention. The second, their professional standards. And the third, their willingness to engage in self-criticism. So the first point of departure between medicine and international development was in their approach to intervention. So in medicine, we improve health outcomes by primarily addressing the individual factors that shape health. So we've all been to the doctor at some point in our lives for a cold, a flu, a virus, Did she say virus? I see some panic spreading across the room. Put the masks down. I'm not talking about coronavirus. But what does your doctor do? Well, she most likely will prescribe some medication that manages the symptoms of that infection, a cough or a runny nose. But what no physician will tell you to do is to stage a protest against environmental pollution because, honey, that is a contributor to the spread of influenza. But an international development practitioner might. And no, it's not because we're all social justice warriors, but because the development approach to solving problems is not to simply change some aspect of ourselves, rather to address the wide variety of factors, the political, the economic, the social, that shape our well-being. Yet this dichotomy provides some insight into why development is so much more challenged than medicine. Because tackling broad issues like climate change, economic inequality, education and access on an international scale possibly required far greater resources, far greater time, far greater collaboration than changing the makeup of a single person. The second point of departure between medicine and international development was in their professional standards. So as many of us know, it takes about 10 years to earn a medical degree. Even I'm dreading it. But the same cannot be said for international development. While some people will have degrees in the discipline, there's no formal education required to work in the field. But that fact has led to disastrous outcomes. One story that recently made headlines was that of an American woman named Renee Bach. She's pictured in this photo. At the age of 20, with absolutely no medical training, she decided to start an NGO in Uganda to help malnourished children. What this culminated in was Bach posing as a physician and conducting dangerous medical procedures, blood transfusions, on the kids. The result? 105 children died. And that is exactly the problem with development. That anybody, regardless of their expertise, can run any project with absolutely no centralized oversight. Bach is now being prosecuted under Ugandan laws, thankfully. But I ask, where are the safeguards that prevent these atrocities from happening in the first place? When our good intentions can have such grave consequences, the need for regulation and restriction could not be clearer. The same dichotomy in professional standards can also be seen in the interventions used by medicine and development. In medicine, for a drug to be approved for the treatment of a condition, it must pass several stages of research and testing. Yet there's no required amount of research that must be conducted before an intervention in development is applied. From my personal experience in Ghana, most of the projects, which, by the way, involve millions of dollars of funding, are based on very limited research, conducted on small samples, and using very weak methodologies. And yes, I agree, there are limitations to what we can know from research, but it's still important that we understand the communities we serve and the interventions we use before we blindly take action. And finally, perhaps the best explanation for why international development was far more criticized than medicine was that we were more willing to look at ourselves critically in development. See, the development studies program at most institutions is fundamentally critical. In fact, ours is called the Center for Critical Development Studies. It's in the name. Students are encouraged to question the motivations, the strategies, and the outcomes of their field. Criticism is celebrated as a force for ethical awareness and improvement. But there is no Center for Critical Medical Studies. Yes, medical students are encouraged to think critically about research and about treatment, but they're not asked to question medicine as a practice, to criticize the philosophy of medicine. Critical theorizing is de-emphasized in the medical curriculum in favor of advancing solutions. Yet medicine remains ripe with controversy about overtreatment, overdiagnosis, over-antagonism of death. So medicine, like development, is fundamentally controversial. But doctors just seem a little less inclined to see their field as such. So what can we do with this divergence? Well, the difference between these fields, I think, points to a way that we can help both improve. From development, medicine must learn to address the broad variety of factors outside of the individual that shape health outcomes. And yes, there has been a trend towards this, but this is still a very underdeveloped part of the curriculum. From medicine, development must learn to increase professional standards, preventing atrocities like the one we saw in Uganda. From development, medicine must learn to increase self-criticism, using this as another driver of improvement and ethical awareness. And finally, from medicine, development must learn to balance critical theorizing with the generation of solutions, allowing the field to improve rather than be completely denounced. So you're probably wondering why I care about all of this. Well, when I was abroad, I saw a lot of development projects that failed. But what I also saw were people who lacked access to basic necessities, who had so much less than I did. And there is a problem with that discrepancy, regardless of whether we know the way to address it. I recently started an NGO with some of my colleagues in Ghana. We focus on providing reproductive health education, economic opportunities, and mentorship to young women. One of our projects involved organizing the very first reproductive health seminar in a community with a 60% rate of teenage pregnancy. As a result, 400 residents were able to benefit from free health education. What I've learned is that there is a way to do development right. And I think with greater crosstalk between fields, greater interdisciplinary dialogue, we can get closer to understanding how. My desire to be a physician also hasn't faded, even despite understanding all the controversy around it. As I prepare to start medical school in the fall, I want to keep the insights I have gained from my development work close. They provide a different perspective on how I should think about medicine, broadly, reflexively. And as I continue to pursue both fields, I want there to be ongoing dialogue between medicine and development, not just in this wild head of mine, but out here, in classrooms like this, around the world. As I close, I want to bring us back to that image of our friend Narcissus, hovering at a pool in awe of his reflection. He reminds us that we are indeed self-absorbed creatures who can become engrossed in our lives and our fields of study. But he also shows us how looking at ourselves reflexively can help us transform into something beautiful. And just like Narcissus, medicine and international development can grow by examining themselves from the eyes of each other. But first, we must be willing to head down by the water, to sit and to ponder, to stare curiously. For what we might learn, that willingness requires tremendous courage and strength. And I wish us all exactly that. Thank you.